The UK is in crisis. The Tories have dumped an underperforming economy and massively failing public services in Labour's lap. The country faces massive difficulties, and I worry that Labour's plans are just not enough. They're tinkering, they're small changes when big change is required. There are some reasons to be a little bit positive, and I've done a separate video on this. But Labour's plan is so moderate, so cautious. It's just not enough. The problems are so big that something much more ambitious is required. These are just some of the problems. I'm going to highlight 6 major issues. The first problem is the NHS. There are more than 7.5 million people on the waiting list. We have an unprecedented backlog. This chart shows the scale of the problem going forwards. The Nuffield Trust looked at planned health spending for each of the main parties in the election and how it would affect funding up until 2029. Interestingly, the 3 parties were relatively close in spending commitments. The Liberals planned to increase spending the most, as shown by the yellow line. The Labour and Tories were almost identical. The dotted line shows what funding is required to fund the current NHS workforce plan put into place by the previous government. It's clear that Labour's spending plans are far short of what is required even to implement the existing policy. The second problem is education. School buildings are collapsing, but another worrying indicator is the targets for teacher training. The target has only been reached once in the last 9 years, shown by the grey column, and it's fallen in the 2 most recent years. Only 62% of targets were reached in 23-24. There was a shortfall of 16,500 teachers just in that year. In the Labour manifesto, they've promised 6,500 new teachers. This will be an improvement, but still well short of targets. The third problem is prisons. The UK's prisons are in crisis. This chart shows the prison population since 1900. It's grown significantly in the last 60 years, since the 1960s. The last 30 years have seen really dramatic growth. We've put a lot more people in prison. The trend has flattened in the past decade, but let's look at the latest Ministry of Justice projections, shown by the green dotted line. The prison population is projected to massively increase on current trends. Conditions inside prisons have deteriorated significantly. These are the official performance ratings. 44 prisons are considered to be of concern. That's 37% of prisons. 8% are considered to be of serious concern. With the projected growth in the prison population, this is just unsustainable. Now, Labour has some interesting ideas on prisons, some radical ideas to reduce the prison population, and I'm interested to see what they do on this. But the current situation is just inhumane, whatever wrongs people have done. The fourth problem is local government financing. I've done a video on councils going bust a little while back due to lack of government funding. 1 in 5 council leaders fear bankruptcy this year. Local public services are seriously under threat. The fifth problem is poverty. There's a record number of food banks. Many people are struggling even for the basics. What is particularly concerning is child poverty, which is at tragic levels and is absolutely unnecessary in one of the richest countries in the world. A major cause of this is the 2-child benefit cap, which was introduced by the Tories and came into effect in 2017. We can see the impact that this has had. 40 to 50% of children in 3 and 4 children families are living in poverty, shown by the red and orange lines. Now, I can hear people saying that people shouldn't have so many children if they can't afford it. The first response to this is that we have an ageing population crisis. We need as many children as possible to finance the future. But the truth is that this debate is a luxury. Much more important than that is that children in our country are suffering in unacceptable ways, and we can do something about it. It's really sad that Labour hasn't committed to change the two-child benefit cap, as this would be a very popular policy. This isn't just us socialists that think this. Church leaders, children's charities are all calling for the cap to be abolished. Even Suella Braverman supports removing it. The sixth problem is house building. We have a housing crisis in this country. House prices are through the roof and completely inaffordable for first-time buyers, as are rental prices. This chart shows the golden age of house building, a period of 20 years from the 1950s to early 1970s. At this time, affordable housing was readily available. But it's interesting to look at the breakdown of who was actually building those houses. It was the state that was producing a massive amount of this increased housing. Since the early 1960s, private construction has been relatively constant. There has been some growth in construction by housing associations, but this is nowhere near the level of previous local authority council housing construction. There is no money under Labour's plans to build new houses. They will ease planning restrictions, which will definitely improve conditions for house building, but the plan for the actual building of houses seems to rely totally on the private sector. How will the government get the private sector to build enough houses? Far more than they have ever built before. And will profit-seeking companies be acting in the best interests of the public? We actually need a massive house building programme, and this requires a radical increase in funding. Labour just can't afford anything like this under their current plans. These are just 6 of the many problems. The UK is in crisis. The situation is really dire. We need radical solutions. We need a massive spending plan. We need to increase taxes on the wealthy. But let's not just penalise them. Let's come up with a renewal plan that people can buy into, including the super wealthy. In conclusion, there is no doubt that 14 years of Conservative rule has left the country in a mess. It's a complete disaster. In this way, the new Labour government is a positive development. To use a football metaphor, Labour is providing fresh legs, fresh ideas, and I've done a video on the new economic approach where I've tried to find some positives in Labour's plans. But the truth is that Labour only offers incremental change. This may be enough for re-election, call me a sceptic, but I believe that this is Labour's top priority. However, Labour's plan will not deal with the massive inequality that exists, with the poverty, with the broken public services, with the failing infrastructure. We are increasingly living in a two-tier society, the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the not rich. I think Labour will aim to increase the number of haves, which may get them back into power. But to really deal with this catalogue of problems, with the terrible mess that the Tories have dumped in Labour's lap, a much more radical plan is required than what Labour is planning so far. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd be really grateful for that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.